Good morning, everybody. It is Tuesday. We are live on the, 15th of October. Oh my God, 15th of November. All right, here we go. Let's do it. Have you heard Mariah Carey yet? Because that's how you know. So you know it's happening. It's almost time for Christmas decorations. We were talking about this with Mash just yesterday. He said his are already up, and I'm feeling the pressure, I must tell you. I mean, I'm not in that much of a hurry, but I can't not get excited, right? I'm allowed to get excited, so that's happening. All right, so many things to do today. In fact, it is so jam-packed that we've even got a guest in the first 10 minutes of the show. So you know when that happens that we're trying to squeeze everything in so we can give you the best possible reason to wake up on a Monday morning, Tuesday morning, Wednesday morning, and so on through the week. And it's going to be like this right till the end of the year. So even if everybody else seems like they've taken their foot off the accelerator, I think there's a bit of speed gathering on our side all the way till the end of this year, which is not that far away. A couple of people on the comments lines already. We'll be joined shortly by Lebang. You know, poor Lebang, she seems to have like the worst luck when it comes to hiring people to work in a domestic situation for her. And listen, I mean, lots of people don't have the greatest luck in that respect because it's bloody hard to find someone who, you know, you think about the people that you bring into your house. It's an intimate setting. It's something that she's had no luck with nannies. She's had no luck with like helpers, cleaners, you know, maids, servants, people to. It's a really hard thing to do, to find the good ones. One of my sister's friends, they hired a guy who'd been trained by a butler school. I kid you not. This guy was like a very expensive, full-on butler. These friends of my sister's, a gay couple, they just decided it was too difficult to run everything themselves, so this guy would do the shopping for them. He would he could drive anywhere. Obviously, he had his own car as well. He had very nice accommodation there with them. He'd look after the animals. He'd walk in the morning with a tray of tea or coffee or whatever it was that they wanted. You know, and that sounds really it sounds kind of ridiculous because this is 2022 and we're not acting out the crown. And it does sound really lovely if you think about it for just a short while. But if you think about it for a bit longer, it's almost more responsibility. I think there are a lot of people who would just prefer to do everything themselves. So I don't know what the answer is to this, but I do know that poor Lebang has had no luck whatsoever. She wants to this morning address some of the things that she can do around the house that she doesn't want to pay someone else to do, you know. She's fired her pool guy. So even that is now a disaster. So we'll find out from her what's happening. But there are all these roads that are still closed around my house. Yesterday, I had to go to Gym and do some grocery shopping, and like the off ramp that I was going to take has been completely closed. Some truck just drove straight through it, and it was carnage down there. So the police had actually closed off that off ramp as well. I just thought, you know, like there are two roads now. There are two ways to get out of my house, and if one more of those goes, I'm in big shit. I might be trapped here forever. Forget about lockdowns and COVID. This could be the reason that I'm trapped. So there's a whole lot of stuff happening at the moment, which is making things a little bit exciting in my world. I hope it's going extremely well in yours. Tell us what you're up to. You can send us a WhatsApp WhatsApp voice note 071-783-6214. You can comment directly on the YouTubes. And we'll get to Lebang just now. She's just restarting her machines at home because she also has to do all of that since there's no one else she can rely on. Sebanda says maybe Lebang is rude. We'll ask her just now when she comes on. Uncle Potse says their own Jeffrey, basically. Yeah, Jeffrey from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, right? Well, listen, there are people who can afford to have like a whole staff component. And for some, I know people who just hate being at home when it's like the day where, the cleaner comes, because they prefer to just wander around their house in their dressing gown on those days. And if they have appointments and things, they'll get dressed for those. If they have virtual meetings and things, this is obviously especially during COVID, but since then as well. And those people just don't like anyone in their house. They'd rather clean up themselves. They'd rather do all the slogging. They'd rather have that stuff in hand than have some essentially stranger wandering around their house while this is going on. And then there are those people who just are absolutely okay with it. They like leave for work in the morning, and the person who cleans their house or who looks after their house or whatever else it is spends more time in the house than they do, and they're okay with that. So I think either way, I think you've got to come up with whatever works for you best, and you don't want a plan that makes your life worse and that costs you more money than it should. And if you can find that balance, then that's very good for you. Lebang is also going through a lot lately. Be kind, says Tracy. No, I am, but she's the one who makes me laugh when she talks about this stuff. So we'll ask her ourselves when she gets back on. Carl says, Gareth, you're in your 40s. Can you give us 5 years notice before the show ends for good? Yeah. I mean, I've also got to face up to the fact, right, that I've got all sorts of other things happening now too. So it's not as if it's just this show. But I don't know what I'd do first thing in the mornings. Like, what would I do? Sleep late? That wouldn't be a good thing, would it? I kind of like the idea of a bit of discipline in the mornings, first thing. The idea of you have to be up to do the show at 6. It does make me feel like I am starting my day on the right foot. And for all of us who are part of this live show every morning, it's a little bit of um it's like the best way to wake up club, you know? This is the way we kind of figure out what's going on in the world. We kind of start a conversation first thing in the morning. We have a responsibility to each other. You have to listen. I have to pitch up. We have to have conversations, and we're gonna talk about all of this nonsense every morning at 6 o'clock, and it kind of makes us feel like you belong to something, even if you're not really a belonger like me. So I don't know. I don't want to get too philosophical about it, Carl, but don't worry. For the moment, you're okay. You're safe. You don't have to find some alternative. Ooh, I discovered a podcast yesterday. Speaking of alternatives, um, because I'm not threatened by the fact that there are some very good podcasts out there. I know that some of them are doing amazing stuff. I mean, we've even produced podcasts that people would prefer to listen to than to listen to this show. So this one is called. Let me just find it for you quickly because I don't want to tell you about it, and then you sit there going, "Yeah, but you didn't tell us what the podcast was." It's called Noble Blood. It's about, and the episode I listened to, because I've only listened to one, but it's really good, is about the Irish crown jewels that were stolen in the early 1900s. What an interesting! It's all put together by someone called Dana Schwartz, who's an American, and she just tells these really interesting history stories. She spoke to some really amazing people, but she basically just tells you this detective story about the Irish crown jewels and what happened to them, and how there were these 3 people who were suspected of this, back in the early 1900s, and how the Irish crown jewels aren't even crown jewels, really. So very, very interesting stuff. Also, we got to chat a little bit later on about the Senzo Miua trial, which is still dragging on. Apparently, Kelly Kumalo's lawyers were denied access to the courtroom. So we've got to talk about what's going on there. And maybe there's some people who are listening to us this morning who know more than I do about it. Again, not something I've been paying special attention to. Marco says, Gareth, this will sound strange, but I dreamt of you twice. Strange. It's weird. I had the most lucid dream ever the other day that I was defending. There was this group of women who'd been. This is the kind of weird dream I have. So Marco, don't feel bad. Um, I dreamt that there was a group of like 4 or 5 women that I knew who were all in danger. And don't ask me why, what was going on exactly, because, you're always a bit, the next morning you wake up, you're like, what a horrible dream. But you can remember certain things about it. I remember I shot this guy, I killed him in the dream, and then I went to jail. And it was so upsetting to me because I suddenly thought, I was trying to rescue and save these women, but now I'm going to jail. And I've always said, sort of tongue in cheek, no good deed goes unpunished. That's the kind of dream I have, and I still don't. I don't know what it means. These people who interpret dreams will give you. They don't know what they're talking about. They'll give you 10 different kind of interpretations of what a dream is. Meanwhile, it's just your subconscious just kind of clearing out the trash bin. That's what I think anyway. So it's probably nothing. But I woke up feeling very, very sad about the state of my life because I made this terrible decision to stand up for these women. So I don't know what that means. I don't know what your dreams mean, Marco. But if you try and figure it out and you tell us what it is, then we may take an interest in it. But some weird people also appear in my dreams. It's sometimes it's people that I've known for a long time, obviously, but there will be characters in my dreams sometimes that I have no idea who they are. Never met them before. They're not people I've ever seen, but they are full people. They have, like they come from central casting. They've got a backstory. They dress a certain way, and you can tell your subconscious is working hard to make the story feel real. So I love a vivid dream, but it can be very, very distracting. And the next day, it can actually influence your mood. KF says, KF Malindi from Zimbabwe, who we love. I actually saw KF the other day. He popped in at the office. He used to be the host of one of our shows on cliffcentral.com, and it's probably about time we get KF back on the show so we can catch up with him. He says Zimbabwe has a big live-in help culture, both gardeners and maids. Sometimes the gardener and maid are even husband and wife. Yeah, that happens in South Africa too, KF. And I don't know why in South Africa we have this idea that being, in service in houses and gardens and things is somehow a not very dignified job. It really is, actually. It's not the worst job, but it's not the best job. It depends, obviously, who you work for. But in South Africa, we have rich and poor people who have someone to come in and clean the house. I mean, it's one of the few countries in the world where, someone in a very mediocre place in life who doesn't necessarily have a huge amount of money or a massive big house or, a very important job or any of that stuff can also have somebody to come and do this stuff around the house. So it's an interesting place that we live in because there are so many people who need work. And even though cleaning up someone else's house is not the best job, I mean, who would want to do that, right? If you work for nice people, there are all kinds of perks. I mean, I know people like the friends of my sister I was just telling about now. They bought this guy a car to be able to work for them. So he went from kind of just graduating out of whatever it was, butler school or whatever, to having a car, having a really nice place to live, getting a very good salary. And what was the hardest part of his job? It was like making coffee and tea and cleaning the house. How hard could that be? And I clean my own house as a therapy. I do it because I love it. So there are worse jobs. I mean, I wouldn't work in a mine if you gave me the choice between the mine and working for someone in their house. So it's an interesting discussion. When do we close for Christmas and reopen? People are full of questions this morning. Let me tell you, we're working right up to the 24th. I think the last show will be the 23rd of December, Friday the 23rd. And then we'll probably be closed for a week and a bit. So it's not even that long. But we will have stuff going on throughout as well. So don't stress. And we're all going to take a little break. Me, Simphiwe, Mash, Dori, Homolemo, Lebang, all of us will be taking some time off over that period. But I mean, who doesn't, right? It's not like there's so much that we need to do during Christmas and New Year. So there's some businesses that get very busy at that time of year. Ours is not one of them. Carl says, I know all good things come to an end, but I quite literally get anxious when I think about what I do without Cliff Central in the mornings. All right, well, calm your anxiety, Carl, because as I've just answered a little while ago, no plans for the moment of going anywhere. 5 years of notice, says Square Peg. Cliff Central Fountain of Youth. Who are you referring to? Simphiwe? Because she just is not. I don't know how, but there's some people who age really, really well. And Simphiwe is not even old, so I don't think you have to worry about her. But there are some people who age very badly, very quickly. And usually they're people who've spent a huge amount of time in the sun, like especially white people who've spent a lot of time in the sun. It's not good for them. They age very badly. Someone was saying to me the other day, you want to get old quickly? That's the way to do it. So I don't know. Sharon also has very weird dreams. She says, sometimes I feel like I'm floating in the air and it's a lovely feeling. Oh, yeah, I've had the flying dreams a lot, where you just fly and where I can actually have out-of-body experiences. Now, whether those are dreams or not, that's a whole other story. Woody says, speaking of dreams, I dreamt that my husky was sick and all her hair fell off to the point where she looked like a Sphinx cat. Oh, God, that's horrible. Ugh. Tracy says, food can affect her dreams. When I have a cheesy dinner, the dreams are crazy and super vivid. Someone told me once, and it could just be an old wives' tale, but someone said to me, if you eat lamb, it tends to make you dream a whole lot more and far more lucidly. So I don't know if that's true. I don't know what the reason would be. But for some reason, I'm always extremely careful, like after lamb, to pay attention to what I'm dreaming. Neil says, holy shit, Marco. Gareth's in our minds also had a lucid dream playing golf with him at Sun City and ended up hunting baboons in the hotel. Now, one of those things is something I might end up doing with you, Neil, but the other one is not going to happen. Can you guess which one it is? Golf or hunting baboons? Which one do you think is more likely an outcome if you and I had to do something that was entertaining to us both? I'll give you a clue. The one that I would not want to do is the one with the clubs. And yes, I know people are going to say, "Oh, how can you shoot baboons?" They're a pest some of the time, and in places like Sun City, I mean, I think they've got it under control. But the monkeys and baboons there are a real problem. You know, you've got people staying in hotel rooms; they leave their doors open. There's fruit on the table. These baboons will come straight in. And I have to say also that it can be very, very entertaining if you're a foreign tourist, if you're watching foreign tourists and they see these things, because a baboon is not a cute little, hey, little monkey thing. A baboon can be bloody scary. If you see those teeth, you realize that it probably is a good idea not to look for shit with them. This place is amazing. After my helper has been here, I hardly have time to clean my place myself. Well, you see, that's the truth, Dogozo. And obviously, in South Africa, we've got a race component to it, but that's also changing, and has been different for a long time. But it's easy to just reduce these things. So, you think white person is the boss, and the maid is the cleaner is black, and that's not the case in so many places now. I mean, this butler that these friends of my sister had, he happens to have been Zimbabwean, very well educated guy, also would be able to do all kinds of things that the average helper might not be able to do, which is why he had to be paid more and had this qualification. But by and large, there are a lot of people who could do with someone like this because their job just is too intense for them to be able to also then have to get home and clean the house and wash the dishes and do the ironing. And I mean, like, ironing is something, I will always find. I will do whatever I have to do. I'll work 4 jobs in a row, but I do not want to do clothes washing and ironing. It's just not something that gives me any joy. Cleaning up, sure, I'll do that. That's not a problem. Square Peg says, Gareth, will you consider doing a show from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. or 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. will be a guaranteed hit? What, like a live show like this one? I don't know. I mean, I think this show is good enough, but I was thinking about doing like an interview show because, we get these really interesting guests on and just changing the format completely and sitting talking to people who even if it's people from my life, not necessarily famous people, like sitting down and doing an hour with each of my friends and then letting people hear that, because that could be a very interesting conversation, and maybe even do it over a few drinks, because then you get the really good stories. And I mean, between me and at least a handful of my friends, we've got some really funny and very entertaining stories. And I think it would make for some pretty interesting listening. Yeah, Carl agrees with me. Cricketers in their 40s all look like octogenarians. Too much sun. Yeah, listen, that's a you ask any dermatologist or aesthetician or any of these people who do, these treatments on mostly women, but also men these days, and try to get them to look younger. It's not easy if you've been in the sun the whole time. The dreams where you pick up a lot of money off the ground are so annoying. Well, they're only annoying, Mapelo, when you wake up and you realize you don't actually have that money. So I agree. Annette loves ironing and watching a movie. It's very relaxing. Okay, well, this is a perfect opportunity for us to bring in poor Lebang, who's now had to get rid of someone else in her house because. Are you there, Lebang? Lebang, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? Coming in.
Yeah,
Over. Coming.
loud and clear. So listen, I hear you had to
How?
also get rid of your pool guy now. You poor you. I was just saying at the start of the show, like you can't hold on to a cleaner, you can't hold on to a nanny, you can't hold on to a pool guy. Maybe you're the problem, and I'm not being mean, but maybe it's you.
Yeah, to work for, because clearly it's just not meant to be. He was doing nothing, Gareth. He would come here, he would like just pour chlorine every week, but I would never see the bottom of my pool ever. So I was like, let me just see what YouTube has to say about this. And YouTube was like, no, buddy, you can't just be pouring chlorine every day. There has to be more to that. So it was just over for him. Like I just had to let go of him. Sorry, I haven't even told him yet. I don't know how, but I'm building up the courage just to be like, hey, bro, we tried.
So we were talking. Dogozo just made a point about how like he loves when it's cleaning day at his house because someone comes in, cleans the house for him. He gets back and the house is nice and beautiful and clean. It smells nice. Everything's in its place. He said he can't afford to do that himself. He'll be too exhausted. He's got a busy job. A lot of us are like that. You've got all the kids as well, so it must be a relief when there's someone to do that. But there are certain things around the house that you have thought about doing yourself, right? And there's some things that you just absolutely refuse to, like the pool. I mean, is the pool something you want to do yourself? Hmm. Hey,
Look,
all I'm hearing.
I'm
Wait, all I'm hearing is like breathing, and it's very weird. So we must try and reconnect with Lebang. I don't know what's going on there with her connection. It's sounding terrible. Let me get rid of her there, and let's see if we can get her back on. Maybe Simphiwe can work on that in the meantime. Always remember to look after the maid, or she might start telling people that Mr. Mazzotti is visiting a lot and giving you brown envelopes. And after you entertain guests, white powder on CD cases. Well, yeah, we've seen. Forget about the former minister of finance, Malusi Gigaba's wife, who like turned on him during the state capture hearings. You remember those like bombshell um, kind of info drops that she was doing about what was going on, and bags of money that the Guptas were sending, and all the things that were happening, a big safe in the house and all that stuff. Because obviously, your partner is someone that can tell a huge number of not particularly flattering stories if you're a dangerous, dodgy person who's been involved in this kind of stuff. But the maid will definitely tell stories. First of all, to all her friends, I'm sure, but also to anyone who's asking from the law. So if you are doing dodgy things, yes, you should definitely look after your maid because she knows stuff. So talking about those interview shows, Tracy says catching up with former 5FM folks could be a start, like a what happened to. That's just so mean. I think about if someone had to invite me to do a whatever happened to, because I've done TV and radio, which are kind of big mainstream media things. And there are a lot of people who don't know that I'm still doing this. I meet a great number of people who say to me, "So what are you doing now?" Which means they don't listen to this show. They don't know what we're doing. They think I've gone, I'm past my prime and out to pasture. And I never get offended by it. It's just that they're not paying attention. But if someone had to invite me to a "Where Are They Now" show, there's no way I'd go to that. I'd be like, that's such an admission of like your best years are behind you, which I don't believe for a second. So I wouldn't want to go on a show like that. So why would I want to invite other people on a "Where Are They Now" show, Tracy? It'd be a bit insulting and embarrassing, don't you think? Okay. A show like Ben Maher does, says San Marie. Shoot whenever over drinks or a relaxed setting, but release at the same time each week. Yeah, I mean, we could do that. Where we actually do it in my house. I invite one of my friends around. We just have, 3 or 4 cameras, but it's just us in a room, and there's no filter. It's totally talk, shoot the breeze, have fun, make each other laugh, that kind of thing, and then release it as a special episode. I think that could be fun. And even it could be something where I could interview people who listen to the show. Like I could have some of our regulars like you guys on, and that could be interesting. Carl says, "Isn't it funny when you hear Iron Man, you think of a superhero, but when you hear Iron Woman, you think of an instruction." You did that, not me. I'm not gonna own up to that one. "What we have here is failure to communicate," says Square Peg about Lebang's connection. Time for Lebang to get rid of her internet guy as well. Yeah. Now, look, I think to take things to the next level, which we're going to do next year, I'm excited actually, because we're going to be doing at least one show a week again from the studio, starting in January. That's already got me excited. And if I can also add some new components, like maybe this interview show, where it's not like a radio show, it's an interview show. This is much more like a radio show. I think we could have a lot of fun. So, any ideas are welcome. Let me know what you think. And you can always email me, Gareth@cliffcentral.com. I'd love to hear from you. Let's get to some headlines. It is 6:30 and see what's going on over there. So, first of all, I mentioned the Senzo Miwa trial, and I got to be honest and upfront about this. I've fallen off the wagon on this one. I have not been paying attention, and it's not because I'm not interested in Kelly Kumalo, but I'm not interested in the legal wranglings here. It's just become too complicated. So they returned on Monday, yesterday, for another round, and the cross-examination of a state lawyer, Tumelo Madlala, resumed. I'm reading this from EWN this morning. And the lawyers for Kelly Kumalo have asked the Pretoria High Court for access to the courtroom. The trial returned, and 5 men are being tried for the 2014 murder of the Bafana Bafana captain. He was killed at Kumalo's Vosloorus home. She was his girlfriend at the time. At the start of the trial, Kumalo's lawyer, Magdalene Munsami, was asked to leave the courtroom, with Judge Maumela saying this was in order to preserve the purity of the trial. They are demanding that they get access to what's going on. In a letter addressed to the judge, the lawyer, that's Munsami, reminded the court that Kumalo was equally a victim of a robbery and that the accused had been charged with murder as well as robbery. She requested to be present in the court to understand all the material aspects of the deliberations. Both the state and defense lawyers have opposed this request. After admonishing her for failing to address the court through proper channels, Maumela upheld his initial ruling for her to recuse herself from the court proceedings. So it seems to me like there are just a lot of parties here who all are hoping for some clarity, some satisfaction, and I don't know that anyone's going to get it. But it's increasingly becoming so complicated as to make the rest of us lose interest. Bladen Zimande has denied there have been attempts to seal forensic reports into the National Skill Fund's missing 5 billion rand. There's 5 billion rand that's gone missing from just the National Skills Fund. Billion is a lot of zeros, hey? So, Higher Education Minister Bladen Zimande, can't believe he's still in government. He's been there for such a long time and he's got absolutely nothing good done. If anybody has evidence to show that Bladen Zimande has run any part of higher education well, I will be more than happy to eat my own words. But for now, I'm going to stick by this. He's a stupid old communist who has made no inroads into improving the quality of higher education in South Africa. And I don't believe that he is the best person to run anything, let alone higher education in this country. If you could prove me wrong, I will be happy to say I got it wrong. Anyway, he says that there's no attempt to seal a report into a forensic investigation around this 5 billion that went missing. The truth of the matter, he says, is that I made a request to SCOPA, which is the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, to the effect that the Department of Higher Education and Training should be given a reasonable space to deal with all the consequence management matters due to processes and recommendations arising from the forensic report. So in other words, he's trying to have first sight of this thing so that he can explain it, because they're going to be questions that are going to make him and the rest of his people look a little bit silly. He was responding to a written parliamentary question from the EFF. They wanted details. Bloody right they do. I'm with the EFF on this. I also want details. Zimande said the processes before releasing the report included informing and charging officials implicated and subjecting them to some disciplinary procedures. Yeah, but why can't we see that straight away? Why does it have to go to you first so that you can sanitize it, so you can make sure that none of your friends are implicated? Because that's the only reason that you'd want to see it before we do. He says they've got to approach law enforcement agencies in cases where criminal conduct has been found. He also said they've got to deal with implicated skills development providers, including blacklisting and recouping of NSF funds. The Department of Higher Education and Training has started some of these processes where certain officials have been placed on precautionary suspension. Again, precautionary suspension. I mean, if you have a whiff of corruption about you, they should just fire you. There is no room for anybody to be kept in this. Zimande appointed a forensic company to conduct a full-scale investigation into the financial affairs of NSF after an amount of just under 5 billion over 2 financial years could not be properly accounted for. You know, I know people who are very, 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 very rich. And 5 billion doesn't just go missing. You know, there's no company in South Africa that's being run by anyone where if 5 billion just suddenly went missing, it would even be allowed to get to that kind of number. Anyway, let's see what happens. It's just an outrageous story in every way. And maybe because I don't know that much about this, I haven't heard about this until now, shows you how little we know about what's going on and how much the amounts are in government. Maybe Blade is the good guy here. Maybe Blade just wants to find out where this money's gone. Who knows? We will have to figure it out step by step. All right. Lebang is still struggling with her internet, but we'll see if we can get that sorted out. Con artists posing as health officials in Cape Town. You know, you got some smart criminals in this country, and I know the immediate temptation is for us to get angry about this, but this is pretty wild. They say there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? But that is especially true in Cape Town, where city officials have warned food outlets to be on the lookout for con artists posing as health officials. It is understood that these people are duping restaurants into giving them free food, or they face having their establishment shut down for violating health laws. Wasn't there a story around this in KFC a while ago? And I'm not sure whether it was actually a kind of publicity campaign, because the waters got a bit muddy with the KFC thing. But there were also con artists there who were going into different KFC outlets saying, we're here to inspect, we need to test your food, and then getting free meals. So apparently now these scammers try to force places into renewing their health certificate of acceptability, or they have to face consequences. Not only is this fraudulent and illegal behavior, but many restaurants are recovering from lockdown and can ill afford to give away free meals, especially to criminals, says the MMC for Health in Cape Town, Patricia van der Ross. She said 3 such cases have landed on the city's desk. City Health is aware of these cases in Kalk Bay, Muizenberg, and Beaufort, where the scam has been attempted by these scammers. If you're approached or anyone visits your premises and demands payment for any reward, or any reward rather, for documentation inspection, insist on checking their credentials. Hashem. It's just unbelievable. Simphiwe, what's going on with the Lebang's router over there?
I have no idea. But hopefully she can sort it out. Because she said she got a new router yesterday. So I'm not
Oh
sure if
my
it's
God.
connected properly.
She got a new router, but she fired her old pool guy and her nanny and everything. I just think Lebang's got too many plates in the air, honestly. She's got so much
Yeah.
going on.
She said that she got scammed again. I was like, girl, like you're not learning
I
from your
know.
mistakes. You're not learning from like one time I understand. Second time I'm like, this is you now.
Well, a couple of people were talking this morning about doing the shows in the studio again and doing some different interview shows and things. What do you think, Simphiwe? Because that's going to end up being work for you and Dori and Ryan and, Homo Lemo and everybody else.
You know, at this moment in time, I don't mind that. There's a different vibe when there's people in the studio
I
and,
like it.
there's a whole lot of energy early in the morning. You don't feel so crappy about waking up like at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's like,
Mhm.
what? So
Exactly.
for now, I'm very like, yes, let's do it. And I think after 6 months, once we've gotten used to it, it's like, no, I'm so tired. No, like, you know what? I don't want to deal with Gareth at like 5 o'clock in the morning anymore. It's
I know.
fine.
It's going to happen. Plus, it does mean waking up that much earlier because to be in the studio at X time and to have everything ready and up and running, it's a little bit
Mhm.
more work than we're doing right now. So maybe it's something we need to do. All right, just to go back quickly to these news stories before we get to Jean-Jacques Cornish, because we're going to do African analysis this morning. Amazon founder, it's always interesting to know what these very rich people are going to do with their money. He has pledged to give away most of his wealth, just like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, who are now the greatest philanthropists of all time just by spending, because they've pledged to give away all of their money. They're not going to leave it to their kids and their grandkids. Amazon founder Jeff Bezos has said he plans to give away most of his $124 billion fortune during his lifetime. The businessman told CNN he's going to donate his wealth to fighting climate change and reducing inequality.
Sure.
Well, that's great. You could do whatever you want with your money. I don't necessarily think this makes him a better person than those people who decide to hold on to it, especially because he's taking on two specific causes there, which are unfalsifiable. In other words, there's never going to be a point where people go, yay, we've defeated climate change, or yay, we've defeated inequality. In other words, their goals, which while they sound noble, are unattainable. There's never going to be a moment when human beings are not doing damage to the environment, right? And there's never going to be a moment where there isn't inequality. Inequality is bound up in existence. Some days you are poorer materially than someone, some days you are richer materially than someone else. Some days your health is better than theirs. Some day you have some people are smarter, some people are thinner, some people are happier. Inequality is part of the package. So when you say I'm going to donate all this money to solve inequality, what exactly are you saying? You're saying nothing. That's a worthless statement. So Jeff, you know what? Maybe you should keep your money. I can't believe I'm saying
Yes,
this.
he should. I
Keep your money
I just think it's a
because
scam. And he's trying to get
yeah,
people to be like, "Oh, he's such a good guy." And I'm just like, "Can we look at these
good.
organizations?" I'm sure he owns the two organizations that he'll be so gracefully giving all this money to. So, I don't buy it.
You
No.
know what? You know what, Jeff? You can do something right now that would help inequality, solve inequality. You could give us all 20% off of Amazon for the next 2 years. How about that? How about
Mm,
you pay half of everything that we want to buy on Amazon for 2 years? You could afford that. You could pay that off right now. During your lifetime, you can actually see the joy and excitement that you will create in other people's lives. Of course, he's not going to do that. Easier for him to say, I'm going to solve global warming and climate change, and I'm going to fix inequality. Why? Because there's no way we can measure you on that.
and
That
I think
sounds
it'll make him more money. It's like he'll give away the 100 million or whatever, and then he's gonna come back tenfold. I think it's just a plot, a scheme. That's just me. I
well,
just
let's
don't
see.
trust him.
Yeah, I don't know. I always have more. I have more respect for someone who has a smaller, more attainable goal and where there are actually deliverables in place. Like if you say to me, like Elon says he wants to make a bullet train between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Like those Japanese trains that go really, really fast. Now, that is something that you can do. There's a certain amount of money that needs to be spent. It can be done over a certain amount of time. And once there is actually a train that people can use, you can say, tick, I've done that one. So I have more respect for a goal like that. And I have more respect for people who don't have hundreds of billions of dollars and say, you know what I want to do? I want to build a library for a bunch of school kids in my area, or I'd like to give internet access to a school in my area, or I'd like to, help buy a piece of land and let a whole lot of ladies in, a rural part of South Africa who don't have a lot of money and don't own their own land, I let them farm that land and keep the produce. Now, that seems to me like something that is attainable. You can tell when you've won. There's no way you can tell you've won if it's going to be about reducing inequality or fighting climate change. Those are just bullshit goals. And I mean, Gates also, by giving away his fortune, he's got richer, as Simphiwe says. He's got richer since he pledged to give all his money away, not poorer. So this is all just a game that these super wealthy billionaires play. I'm not so sure I believe any of it. Let us turn our attention now to the great Jean-Jacques Cornish, who's online. He's ready to tell us about what's going on in the continent of Africa, our own continent, and we're going to catch up with him in Africa Analysis. It's brought to you by the Johannesburg Business School, where we look at what's happening around us. Here he is, Jean-Jacques Cornish. How are you, sir?
Bonjour, I'm very well. I'm glad to hear you speaking about being parsimonious. I walked past a woman shaking a Salvation Army box, and I realized there will be no salvation in our world. And besides that, I'm anti-military, so I just walked straight past, so I didn't put my $2 into the box. I don't feel as guilty now after hearing what you've just said.
Well, you know what? There's charity, and then there's because I think charity is really important, Jean-Jacques. And I think in this country, we have lots and lots of very worthy causes. And there isn't a street light that you go past in Johannesburg or Pretoria or even Cape Town where you aren't immediately made aware of need and of the desperation of so many people in this country. But when you hear these billionaires say that they're going to solve huge, big problems that have no actual end point or victory conditions, it's just hot air, right? It's like the hot air that's coming out of COP27 at the moment. Again, you see all these people flying in there in their private jets, flying there in these huge, putting enormous carbon miles on the earth. And then they're going to sit there and tell Jean-Jacques Cornish, Gareth Cliff, Simphiwe Mtetwa what we must do, how we must separate our rubbish, and how it's our cars that are causing all the trouble. I mean, it seems to me like just pure
But do these people actually say they're going to cure it? I think Bill Gates has I'm a malaria bore, having nearly died of it myself, so I follow that. Yeah. What he's given to fighting malaria. He's never said, I'm going to beat it, but he certainly said, I'm going to put billions into trying to beat it. And I mean, I have to say, I admire him for that.
That is a good example of something that he has done that has made a difference. But when you say you're going to solve inequality, how do you do that?
Oh, no. Okay. That is,
but I'm glad you brought that. Because
it's worth a bash if you've got a few bob, but it's not something you're going to do. I accept that.
Well, talking about the rich and the poor and people solving problems, one of the reasons that COP is particularly interesting to us is, first of all, it's happened in Africa. Of course, it happened in Durban before, so it's not the first time. But it's happening in Sharm el-Sheikh, which is this amazing 5-star resort area along the Red Sea in Egypt. And everybody's been flying in from all over the world. But what they've come up with is some kind of scheme where, again, they've made it look like we here in Africa, in the global south, as they're calling us now, are hanging around with begging bowls, asking for money. Even our own president, Cyril Ramaphosa, was over there with his begging bowl. And we're taking money from all these other countries who, it has to be said, can scarcely keep themselves warm this winter because of the Russian-Ukraine conflict. And they've apparently come up with some arrangement where, guess what? Africa is going to be given X amount of money, South America, Y amount of money, and other parts of the world, shame, we feel sorry for you, so here's some money. It feels a little patronizing, or am I being unkind?
Well, they promised that sort of money last time and the time before. It's actually meeting those promises. And I think that's what's happening in Sharm el-Sheikh. Sharm el-Sheikh is a fantastic resort. I attended a summit there, and it's people by summiteers when they get there. But for the rest, it's Russians, Russian men who look very threatening, Russian women who are absolutely gorgeous until I don't know what birthday it happens when suddenly they put on 40 kilograms and look like, babushkas. And it's real, but I mean, you should see the place. It really is something. And you can see it being locked down. This COP is when I think they're going to try, but to the extent that they can, hold people's foot to the fire. I mean, I attended the Durban summit, COP, and promised I would never again attend such an event, because as journalists, we are duped. We are told we go there and we sit there, and then on the last day, we stop the clock and talk about the dramatic negotiations underway. And then finally, in the early hours of the following morning, when we should be going home, we announce a dramatic agreement. And in this case, the Canadians who have always been the kind of do-good guys in my years at the United Nations telling us what we should be doing, it was the Canadians who signed up, agreed, went home, and barely had the foreign minister's jet touched the tarmac that they'd broken their promises. And that has happened again and again. And we as the journalists were simply duped into saying there'd been a dramatic breakthrough, and it's just theater. And I'm sad to say, I think that's what's happened in the subsequent COPs. It seemed at the Paris COP that there were commitments to maintaining or reducing global warming, or maintaining it at a level of 1.5 on pre-industrial levels. Well, that hasn't happened. And now we learn that even if they do keep it at that, we're in for significant global warming. It's sad. But to get to this COP, it's very interesting that human rights, which is in a parlous state in Egypt, that is now being looked at. And we have this British Egyptian dual national, Alaa Abdel Fattah. He went on hunger strike, and on the day that COP opened, he stopped drinking water. In other words, he was ready to, shuffle the mortal coil at this point. However, we now learn that there is proof of life that he has, and he's written to his mum and said, okay, I'm drinking water again, and there's great relief at that. But the fact is, all of these human rights, all these dissidents and human rights activists who are being persecuted, jailed, are getting unprecedented coverage. And so that, for that That's alone, it's worth something that it's happened.
I agree with your last statement here on this humanitarian situation and the human rights issue around dissidents. And, everyone in Egypt would have been a dissident if we still had the old president in place, the president who, at the time of the Arab Spring, whose name escapes me for the moment, you'll remember who it is, JJ, because you know these things. Everyone was a dissident under him. Then, of course, we had the Muslim Brotherhood take over.
Mohammed Morsi, I was there for that election. He won it fair and square.
There we go. And now, of course, they're becoming as intolerant as the old dictators.
Well, we had Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. He actually overthrew him. In fact, got red carded by the African Union for that very thing. But then they had another election. Again, I was an observer there. He won that election. Egyptians thought better of what they'd done with the Muslim Brotherhood. And now he's there, but he's really, and I've been there invited by him to the opening of the new Suez Canal. And the human rights in Egypt are absolutely despicable. Egypt, for example, its relation with the United States is very interesting. You know that Egypt gets more money from the United States than the rest of Africa combined.
Mm-hmm. Because it's
a relationship.
Strategically
they
important.
believe, the way they see the Middle East and in terms of Israel and so on, which is their sort of proxy in the Middle East. That the Middle East is a very, 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 very difficult area to understand.
Just to talk about this climate conference again. I'm not one of those people who'd be opposed to anything that makes the world a better place, and especially those things which we can do to mitigate human harm to the environment. But every time I see one of these climate protesters, whether it's the guy who tried to egg King Charles the other day, or all these blue-haired people who glue themselves to walls in museums and throw soup on paintings, precious artworks. Every time one of those climate change activists does something like that, it makes me want to switch on every engine I can and pollute as much of the environment as possible. Is it possible that the climate change protesters are so irritating that they're actually having a negative effect on the cause?
Well, yes, I'm sure that is a case, and I think when they strategize, they would think that every time human rights activists, interrupt a fox hunting party or
Yeah.
take some dramatic action to free animals that are trapped and so on. Yes, there is a backlash, but I think direct action and here we were directly acting against apartheid, taking quite extreme measures, not violent measures. The fact that it set some people against us, well, fair dues. I mean, that would happen, and
I think we're getting.
I'm all for direct action. But where we are at one, you and I, and that is that sometimes we have, and the United Nations is such an institution where people say, what the hell are they doing? And whenever there's a real crisis, what the hell are they doing? They're simply the sum of their members. And to have the United Nations, I believe, is better than not to have it. And
But it's
and so to have a COP is better than not to have it. But I do
Well-
believe that they should say, well, why should we have more? Why should we have more lobbyists for the carbon burning companies than actual delegates from the countries that are threatened by it? Let's change that. Why should we have people arriving there in their private jets, befouling the atmosphere? Surely that should be banned too. So we should fine tune it. But
you get into such trouble if you do, and I agree with you. Like, better to have some global body that's trying to prevent World War III. But I think the UN has been absolutely and completely silent and useless on this Russia-Ukraine question, for example, which is one of the areas maybe they could have been helpful. You don't hear a peep. I don't even know who the Secretary General is because he's made so little of a noise around this particular issue. And we see lots of situations here in Africa too, where the AU or the UN may have been helpful. I mean, there are questions that we've got to address now. We got to talk about Mozambique quickly, and then we'll also get to the DRC and Rwanda, because these things are issues where these supranational bodies should be helpful. Instead, they just create more talk shops where nothing happens. You've spoken about these yourself. You've been present at some of them.
Absolutely. Well, we are going to speak about Mozambique, where they're starting, interestingly, to ship gas. Mozambique wants to be one of the greatest gas suppliers in the world. We have these two countries, Mozambique and Algeria, and everybody's looking towards Africa for that to, in effect, replace the Russian gas that people are not wanting to buy because of the Ukrainian invasion. But they've sent a British cargo ship has taken the first shipment of gas, and President Filippo Nyusi is calling it historic. Well, it is historic, of course. And they've got this offshore plant. It's the Italian one, not the French one, Eni. We don't know what the final destination of that gas would be. It would be very interesting to see where it actually lands up. But, along the Cabo Delgado, that northern area of Mozambique, that insurgency, 5-year insurgency, has left 4,000 people dead and hundreds of thousands of people displaced. And the African Union certainly hasn't been able to do much. The SADC, the regional grouping, has now put some troops in there, and Rwanda has got itself involved for some reason, I think buying favors in a sense. But there are European countries that are saying, well, we should help the Rwandan forces there, which rather surprises me because, I'm very, very cynical about what happens in Rwanda. I think people that admire Rwanda should look at its really, really abysmal human rights state, and the fact that, their president actually has his political opponents killed before you start admiring a country.
Right. Couldn't agree more. But that's good news for Mozambique.
Very
And
good.
and obviously not such good news for Rwanda. But the DRC, continues to be this kind of this thing where people almost want to look away the whole time. It's just it seems ungovernable, and every time they make a little bit of progress, something happens that retards that progress. And of course, we know Rwanda's probably a bad actor in that situation. What about the AU? How's the AU doing? That old AU that we spend so much time and money trying to establish, and then we obviously talk about whenever we can, but nothing ever gets done there. Who's in charge there at the moment? Who's got the chair now, JJ? And what are their priorities? Because this is exactly where they should be involved.
Well, I mean, at the moment, it's still Senegal that's got the chair. But in this case, where we're having peace talks between Rwanda and the DRC, a resumption of them, and that will happen on the 21st, that's next Monday, Uhuru Kenyatta, the former Kenyan president, he is mediating those. He's arriving on Sunday to start talks. And again, it's not the AU that is doing this, but the regional grouping. In this case, it's the Community of East African States who are trying to get that. They're to and fro there. The Rwandans blame the Congo for supporting Hutu rebels in Rwanda. The Congo maintains that Rwanda is supporting M23, and those are Tutsis inside of the Congo. And there's been fighting. I've been to the Congo many times again as election observer, and the fighting is now near Goma, which is the capital in the east. And that's really on the border, effectively, with both Uganda and Rwanda, and the fighting is right nearby, and effectively the support that Rwanda is giving to the M23 is deadly, absolutely lethal for the DRC. So we hope that they can make some progress there, because
But again,
there are 8 neighbors around. Sorry,
any chance that the AU may make a difference here for once?
Well, not really, because the one thing about the AU that really does cripple it is that some of the countries don't even pay their dues, and when they can't put soldiers, they can't put boots on the ground because they just don't have the money to do it. So if they need to put in a peacekeeping force, they have to get it sponsored and paid for by either United Nations or by development partners. So there's the whole issue of African solutions to African problems means African solutions to African problems, those solutions paid for outside of the AU. And until that can be fixed, the concept is not really doable.
Shut it down. It's doing nothing. I'm sorry, Thabo Mbeki and Olusegun Obasanjo. You guys had a great idea here. It was a noble thought, but clearly it's pointless. Without teeth, what does an organization like this do except drink tea and expect people to pay attention to its occasional press releases? It's really not very, very useful, helpful. Let's talk about just one other thing around this, because someone asked a question here, JJ, and you might know the answer off the top of your head. Elon Chief Twat says, what is happening with the US troops in Somalia? That's a good question. I mean, what is happening in Somalia, full stop? We have lots of Somalian refugees and immigrants from Somalia who live here now in South Africa as immigrants. What's going on in Somalia? Is there any end in sight to their troubles?
No, there isn't. And, when you spoke about 2 steps forward, 1 step back, that you see in the Congo, you see that in spades in Somalia. It's really the country of heartbreak. Every time some progress is made, Al-Shabaab, the terror group there, has been driven out of the cities. But that doesn't mean it doesn't come in, with a truck loaded with explosives and blow it up outside of an international hotel. And so that situation is there. But right now, it is the drought that is driving people away. So, I mean, the 2 things that are really decimating the continent are the climate, which is drought, and the conflict. And they have both of those in Somalia. So they're driving literally hundreds of thousands of refugees into Kenya. and Kenya cannot really take many more. So these are people that are, and they're moving more and more and more because people simply don't have anything to eat in Somalia. The country is on the brink of famine, and there's been warnings about that. And then they go again to the United Nations and say, we have to get some food. And the United Nations people, the big powers, are saying, well, okay, well, we'll give it a thought. We just got to sort this Ukraine-Russia thing out first. And, so there are other priorities. And the people, last time, 250,000 people died of hunger. The last time there was famine in Somalia, and we're on the brink of that again. I don't know why we talk like this, because, I tried desperately to bring a bright note to this crossing, starting with the Mozambicans shipping gas, and now we have.
You always do bring a good story, but the truth is that there are some issues that we do need to look at. We can't hide our heads in the sand like ostriches, and you're our contact point for figuring out what's going on here. I think it would be really interesting to have the AU account for itself. Like, actually, let's see how much it costs. Let's see how many people are involved in it, because these big bureaucratic organizations that can't even do what they're actually meant to do, which is, the UN's major purpose in the world and the AU's major purpose on this continent is to help where there's conflict, right? And to prevent all-out conflict. It just seems to me that, again, these guys are doing themselves no favors by actually doing what they're there to do. Instead, they've created sheltered employment for just thousands and thousands of people who consider themselves to be, global actors and activists, and actually they do nothing.
And if you talk about goalless or goals that cannot be attained, they have a lot of debating in the African Union about Agenda 2060. What's the point? You're not going to be around, and they talk about this, and I can commit to doing all sorts of things. I could commit to having South Africa win the Cricket World Cup in 2060. Well, maybe that would be pushing it a little bit, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, thank you, JJ. It's always very good to hear from you, and thank you for your efforts to make the crossing that we do on a Tuesday, every second Tuesday, that much more positive. And you have found some really good stories for us, and you will continue to, I'm sure, because there are little pinpricks of light coming through this dark sheet that's been so often pulled over the stories that we cover, and at least you bring us some positive ones. So thank you very much for that. JJ Cornish and Africanalysis this morning. He'll be back again soon, and we'll cover some more interesting stuff off the continent. It's brought to you by the Johannesburg Business School, and well done, Mozambique. As JJ said, that's a very good story. Starting to ship gas to Europe, exports will go up, and the country will do better as long as the government there doesn't keep all of the money for itself, because that's what happens so often. So let's see if we can get that story to have a happy ending as well. We'll be back with even more. Stick around.
This week on the Auto Trader Podcast.
First things first, you are Ben Pullen, correct?
I am. Last time we checked.
Yes, and you're currently still the chairman and founder of Smart Mobility, correct?
I am, yeah. There's been a few changes actually since I came into the ghost town office back in the pandemic. It was just the three of us.
Yeah.
So I guess the main thing is that the portfolio of events that I had built was basically taken on by VUCA Group, which has been a great opportunity for us to basically build on what we had already built.
Catch us every Monday at 9 a.m. on YouTube and on autotrader.co.za.
It's the decade that just won't go away, mainly because we won't let it. It's That 80s Show, the show that taste forgot. Every Friday, Paolo and Dory remember the 80s. Movies, music, fashion, wham, beachies, and the half. If it was acceptable in the 80s, it will get you cancelled today. That 80s Show, new episode every Friday, live or as a podcast on cliffcentral.com.
It is Tuesday morning, 15th of November. Simphiwe is here with me. We are busy going through some of the messages. We want to hear from you also on the WhatsApp line if you've got something you want to tell us there. A couple of those that I've got to play for you just now that Ryan sent to me last night. Mapelo's got something to say there too. First of all, though, we have to tell you that there's lots of interesting feedback here for JJ Cornish. He's always good. If you want to send us any info that our regular guests might need to hear, or you've got a question for them, you can do that too. You can get hold of us on contact at cliffcentral.com. It's contact at cliffcentral.com, and we will forward that to whoever, whether it's one of the people from Revix who joins us regularly. A lot of people talking about cryptocurrencies, especially with that situation, FTX this week. I was going to talk to Vinny Lingham about this because he's going to join us at some point in the not too distant future, because people are furious about what's happened with this exchange that collapsed, basically. This guy who has defrauded people. And this is not a great story for people who believe in crypto. And we'll have to find out from the guys at Revix what they think of it too, because there are people who we rely on for this information. But if you've got a question for them, you've got a question for, JJ Cornish, you let us know, and we'll make sure that they get them. All right, Simphiwe, a couple of things to talk about. Let's get to this story. And Gareth, when are you guys going on holiday in December, says Elon? Well, I think I addressed that earlier. We're all working right up to the 23rd. Friday the 23rd will be our last show for this year. So we're doing the whole of December. Don't worry, we're going to be here, right, Simphiwe?
Yes. Well, you might be here. I'll be on leave. I've booked my leave and I'll be out living my best life in December.
Yeah, no, listen, are you going away?
No, I love being in Joburg in December. It's quiet. There's hardly anyone around. The restaurants are empty. You get to party it up and no one sees you. So the best place to be in December is in Joburg. It is, honestly, and it's a different vibe. It's such a different vibe. And if there's one thing about South they live up to the December thing. You always need to be ready. That phone call, hey, where you at? I'm 5 minutes out. It's so real.
Mm-hmm. And you can get to where you need to go with no traffic. That's my favorite thing in December. It's also the place is clear, like the roads are open and everything's still going, but there aren't as many people around. It actually is quite nice. Ruth says, don't feel alone. I couldn't agree more. December is dope in December. But I think what you mean there is maybe Joburg is dope in December. But yes, I hear you. And then this is an interesting one from John Bad Dog referring to the FTX collapse. Second biggest donor to the Democratic Party. Well, that's interesting. Elon also wants you to know this. Nyaupe addicts will be around too, Simphiwe, so you've got to be careful of them. But then they're around all year round, so don't worry about that.
Yeah, like this is South the demons that you're going to be dealing with. You're going to be dealing with the Nogata who's you're going to deal with the Nogata who's going to help you park your car, and now you have to tip him, all the time. You're going to have to deal with the fact that there's hardly anybody around. You're going to have to deal with the fact that people are going to call you because jiggy, you have to pay for school fees. That's happening in January. Like, you already know the stresses that come with December. I'm just here for the vibes. And then we'll see what 2023 has to serve us. But enjoy December. And talking about vibes, I know that you're like a big music lover, Gareth. Right? And I recently read an article that kind of is like like the music you listen to or like actually can tell us a bit about your personality.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay. Well,
boy.
I mean, I do think that it reveals something about you. If you ask someone what music they listen to and they only listen to one very narrow genre, like a specific kind of dance music, you're like, well, this person can't be very interesting.
Yeah. So here's the personality traits that you may have. If you listen to pop, they say you'll
Mhm.
be more extroverted, honest, and you a conventional person. I hardly listen to pop, so that's not for me. If you're into rap and hip hop like myself, then despite the stereotype that rap lovers are aggressive or violent, research has shown that it has no link. Um, Rap fans tend to have a high self esteem and are genuinely more outgoing than fans of other styles. So, if you
Yeah,
listen to
I don't think
country,
rap listeners are aggressive. I don't think that's right.
I don't know. But if you listen to country, all right, these fans typically identify as hardworking, outgoing, and very conservative.
Mm, these are all pretty straightforward, though, so far.
If you're into rock or heavy metal, then you are often someone who projects images of anger and aggression. However, the study found such fans to be gentle, creative, and introverted. They also tend to have a low self-esteem. I'm not
Sorry,
sure about
I'm
that.
just gonna make a prediction here that none of these are gonna be really bad because they don't want to like piss off a whole segment. Where did you get this article from? Just out of Oh God, yeah, because you're like, no, there's no music choice that indicates anything negative ever. It's all good. Everyone on this list is going to have something that they can take away that makes them feel better. It's like those astrological charts that they give you, right? Where they say
Oh
to you,
my
"Oh, you're a Virgo. You're going to have a great year." And you look at all the others on the chart, and they also like, "Oh, you can have a great year." So, what? There's no one who's going to have a shit year here on this lineup.
No.
It's amazing.
Well, okay, if you listen to indie, maybe this will indie fans, they tend to be intellectual and creative, but they also tend to suffer from anxiety and have low self-esteem.
Oh boy,
That's a negative, but that's
I don't.
indie. And then dance. Let's get
I
through
don't
the
even know
list before
any.
you judge this,
I don't even.
Gareth.
Yeah, but I don't even know any indie people. Like who listens to indie? That was a thing in the '90s, I reckon. I don't know if that's a thing anymore. Is it?
You know, it is a thing. There's a lot of indie people just, it's the type of people that go to Rocking the Daisies as well. They have that indie vibe. We just like you listen to music that's just a bit off that nobody knows. And we're just like, what's that, Chief? Nah. Yeah, indie people, mm, you know? But then you have people that listen to dance. And those who prefer dance music are typically outgoing, assertive, and
Mm,
open to experience, but rank lower than others in gentleness.
hmm,
All right, maybe. Classical music.
mhm,
I don't know if anyone's ever listened to classical music. So classical music lovers are genuinely somewhat introverted, but at ease with themselves, healthy self-esteem, and they're very creative. And then last but not least, we have jazz, blues, and soul. These are extroverted with high self-esteem. They also tend to be very creative, intellectual, and at ease. And this study was brought to you by Very Well Mind. Mm, that's where I got
okay.
that.
So yeah, I mean, some of the like obviously, if you like dance music, you're going to be outgoing, right? Because otherwise, why would you listen to dance? Who listens to dance music on their own? Um, so Sibanda says Simphiwe will just misbehave and get thrown out of parties like always in December. So Sibanda's read through your
I'm trying to
stories.
be a I'm trying to be a better person. That's not what we're doing this year. We're just gonna enjoy the vibes. We're gonna enjoy, some new music and just go. Toof, 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 toof,
Yeah.
toof, toof. That's
See,
it.
Jared and Jean here both say the same thing that I was thinking of. I'm a fan of like 4 of those categories. So what does that say about me? Am I all of those things or none of them? That's the question.
You're
Unfortunately,
probably
these
all,
things.
like a chakalaka where it has different ingredients but still tastes good. So you everything. You're a mixed masala, Gareth. It's okay. It means you
I
blend in
reckon.
well with other people.
I reckon with these studies or these articles are useful, and really they have to actually base it on some research because otherwise it does sound like an astrological chart. Where they're useful is telling you about, for example, the way people behave in traffic. Like they've shown time and time again that if you listen to very high tempo stuff when you're driving, it does make you more anxious. And probably it makes you drive a little bit worse. So I think that's where it's interesting. But as for the rest of it, I don't know. I mean, it just sounds like it's very if you're a Leo,
Wishy-washy.
moon rising, then you must be this, and I'm just like, that's some bullshit.
Well, we'll see. Like I do, but I won't lie. I do judge people according to what they listen to. Like I listen to a lot of music,
course.
but there's also some artists out there. I'm like, you listen to what? To who? You. Mm. And then there's also people that I don't understand how they could listen to rap because I'm like, you don't look like the type that listens to hip hop. Like,
You'd be surprised.
I can't see it. I can't see it.
So I got this from Mapelo, who wants to know something. So let's get to Mapelo's one first, and then we'll see. These voice notes from both of them. All right. So how does this thing go? Let's just see if we can get these to work. Hang on a second. Mapelo first. Now it's not playing. Great. It's like
Gotta love
technically
technology.
wait a second. I'll just start this up on my own on a separate thing, and then we'll get it going. I can't rely on I can't rely on the software that Steve Jobs' people have put on here. I've got to do it myself. All right, so here's Mapelo. Take it away, Mapelo. There we go.
Morning, everyone. It's Mapele here. I'd like to know, did Ben have anything to do with the Steinheist documentary on Showmax? Because when that Steinhoff scandal came out, Ben had this to say.
Is that the Steinhoff's accounting scandal dates further back than we actually think.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I reckon, please, Showmax or whoever, please make a series about this.
Oh, yeah.
Because it could be the SS version of like House of Cards or whatever. You can call it what you want, but I mean, I reckon there's a story here.
As much as we appreciate Tully's wedding diaries, can we also just have this? So,
well, see, I mean, there was a lot of talk last.
Like, really? I guess that was Ben's original idea. They stole it from Ben if he had nothing to do with it, with that documentary.
Wouldn't be the first time that we have had a discussion about something and then suddenly some other media organization comes up with a good idea. I haven't seen the Steinheist documentary yet, but I've got to watch it because even Dr. Hanan told me it's a really interesting thing to watch. So with that kind of recommendation, I'll get into it. But yeah, there's Ben basically saying a couple of years before they made it that this would be a great documentary. So I'll tell him when we get him on the show again. He was right then. One other quick voice note here. This is from Brandon, checking in on the team and stating how he feels politically drained. So here's Brandon. Brandon, take it away. What's on your mind this morning?
Hey, Gareth and the Cliff Central team. This is Brandon. I can't recall hearing any voice notes on the show in the last couple of days, so hopefully that feature hasn't been cancelled. Thought I'll send a quick note just to echo some of the sentiment that you've been voicing, Gareth, around politics and government, not only locally, but internationally. I think we have very few leaders or even a political system at this stage that inspires. So I'm fairly disillusioned and politically fatigued. I couldn't give a shit about what the ANC or the DA is doing. Stop the talking and start the walking. Anyway, hope you folks are doing well and that your listeners are going to have a great week ahead. All the best.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Also tired of the politicians. Let's just say that maybe from December on, we do not listen to the politicians at all. Let's see if our lives improve. We can all put this into place for December. So no matter what the presidents or the politicians all over the world have to say about things, we ignore them completely for the month of December. Let's see if our lives get better or worse. I can pretty much predict where it's going to go.
Which would be better.
Okay.
It's December. I mean, there's nothing that can go wrong in the month of December. In fact, by the time when November is done, the year is done. Like we're done. We're just coming into the office just to show face for the first 2 weeks, just to be like, I'll be out of office. And then it's tickets. You're not gonna get anyone. No one's doing work. People are leaving at 1 o'clock. They're closing laptops. The year's
But
come to an
Simphiwe,
end, guys.
let's be honest. Even this stuff starts to happen in November for most people.
Oh
I mean, a
yes.
lot of offices. I was driving around in Santon last week, Thursday, I think it was. I went to one appointment that I had there. I just realized like this is the CBD of the busiest city in South Africa, right? And there was so little activity going on. I suddenly thought this is meant to be the middle of the day in the supposedly most important square mile of Johannesburg, where all the business takes place, and there was nothing going on. And it made me a little bit nervous, I won't lie, because it's not December yet. You can tell that people are obviously on a bit of a go slow for November. We obviously had 2.5 years of COVID and weird stuff. Most of the offices shut down and all that kind of thing. But really, this shouldn't be how it looks already. That's all I'm saying. Every day, the entire day, my variety of music is always on. Can't imagine life without music of any kind, says dear Linda. You know what? I found like there are some places where in my day I need music, even though I love podcasts. And even though I've started listening to audiobooks again, which I love, there are some times where you just want music. You don't want, especially because we work with podcasts all day, Simphiwe. I want to be listening to podcasts all day, every day as well. Although to me, there's a lot more mental stimulation to that kind of thing than music. There are some times where you just want a little bit of music.
Yes. And I'm someone who still is following like who dropped an album this week. Like Drake and 21 recently dropped an album together. And I'm like, okay, I need to give that a listen. I need to know what's going on in the hip hop world. And there's a trend on TikTok where Drake said a line and now everyone is kind of just like making that line seem as if he was like a bit more feminine when he said it, because it's like 21, can you tell me something? And everyone's just ripping Drake, like they're just ripping him. They're like, oh yeah, when he was in the studio, I bet you he was just twerking when he said that, like 21, can you tell me something?
Didn't Drake just he did something really interesting. He like went on a fake press tour where he basically he stayed at home, but he pretended that he was being interviewed by all these people. So he would cut questions out of all the famous like late night shows and the big radio shows in America, big podcasters, and then he would pretend that he was answering their questions, but actually it was just like fake interviews, and people bought them hook, line, and sinker. They thought it was real, and he didn't even leave his house.
He even did performances, fake performances, like on the SNL show, where they had Michael B. Jordan kind of announce and be like, "Oh, Drake and 21 performing one of the greatest songs that have dropped in the 21st century," and then boom, there they are performing, and then people are like, "Wait, when did Drake and 21 perform on SNL?" Like, they're ripping everyone, and I was like, "Okay, this is how you do it." Like, now we're talking about you. Now we want to know what's going on. Like, okay, is this album a banger? Let's hear it. So I think that was a great marketing thing that they did, Drake and 21.
That is so clever. I love that. You know, it makes so much sense that, you know, the media we've been doing the same things on TV and in radio for 100 years. And then a guy like Drake comes along and shows just how much bullshit there is going on over there, right?
Yeah, and he doesn't care. Like, honestly, he's just like, I'm living my best life. I have money. And then the cover art for the new album was really dope to even find out. So it's a picture of this lady, I forgot her name, and it was taken about 3 years ago by one of his friends. And then he saw it and he was like, oh, I love the authenticness. And that's how they got the cover art. And I was like, oh, okay, look at you. Look at you.
Well, this has got to be a big wake up call to everybody that you don't even have to leave your house. You can do performances on SNL. you can be by all the greatest people in the world, and you do not have to leave your house. And you can make it look like you're traveling the whole world doing this press tour. Meanwhile, you're doing nothing. You're sitting at home with your, I don't know, your cup of tea in your
And you
hand.
know what's even better? You can buy a verification badge to make it all look legit. I mean, does it not get any better?
Are you going to buy yourself a verification badge for Christmas, Simphiwe? Is that one of your gifts for yourself?
No, I don't have that kind of money to waste, especially in dollars. No. I saw a trend on TikTok where some lady was ripping a guy for like chasing coins after he's dropped it, and it's like, oh, that is so ghetto. I would never do that. I was like, honey, we live in Cyril's economy. I'm picking up every coin. I'm
Uh-huh.
picking up a 1 rand, a 5 rand, a 2 rand.
Uh-huh.
Maybe a 5 up. We can leave that. But any other coin, honey, child, better get that
When
money.
last-
Pick it up.
When last did you even see a 1 or 2 cent? Because we used to make 1 and 2 cent coins. You don't get them, and nobody even sees them anymore. They don't exist. They've gone out of circulation. Just quickly, if you did buy a verification badge, it would cost you just under 150 rand a month. That's how much it would cost you to have that. So think about it.
So much money. You can buy petrol and get, 3 liters, 4 liters for that? Come on, guys. Let's get serious.
Not a lot. All right. It is time for us to get to an episode of Blind History, where we talk this morning about probably the most impressive sailor of all time in world history, but certainly the greatest British sailor. His adventures, his tactical genius, and his courage have inspired Britain to become the greatest naval superpower of the world. Well, it certainly was at the time in the 17 and 1800s. And it helped to bring about the fall of Napoleon and a big change in the balance of power throughout the world. Now, although he had only one eye and one arm, he seems to have had enough energy and ambition for 2 lifetimes. And history looks pretty fondly on his contribution. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about none other than Vice Admiral Viscount Horatio Nelson. And here he is in our latest episode of Blind History with me and with Anthony Meadera. Don't go anywhere. CliffCentral.com, Tuesday morning. There was hardly a breath of wind. Most of the ships weren't moving at all. But there was still the mayhem of battle, cannons and muskets being fired at close range. Officers shouting commands, pierced by the cries of the wounded. While the conflict raged, a one-eyed, one-armed master and commander stood on the quarterdeck of his ship, contemplating his fleet's next move. In his distinctive blue coat, bicorn hat and diamond cockade, it was clear to everyone in Europe that he was Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson. The problem was that it was also clear to a sniper, high in the rigging of the French warship Redoutable. He took aim, squeezed the trigger, and in a single moment, decided the fate of the greatest sailor in the world. The most noble Lord Horatio Nelson, Viscount and Baron Nelson of the Nile and of Burnham Thorpe in the county of Norfolk, Baron Nelson of the Nile and of Hillsborough in the said county, Knight of the Most Honourable Order of the Bath, Vice Admiral of the White Squadron of the Fleet, Commander-in-Chief of His Majesty's ships in the Mediterranean, Duke of Bronte in the Kingdom of Sicily, Knight Grand Cross of the Sicilian Order of St. Ferdinand, and of merit, member of the Ottoman Order of the Crescent, Knight Grand Commander of the Order of St. Joachim. He would have liked that as an intro.
He would have.
Because he was a vain bastard.
He was very ambitious.
And he liked titles and decorations and laudable acceptance from a crowd. So here he is, Lord Horatio Nelson, known as Nelson to history. The only other Nelson that you can really say has broken through all the other uses of that name is our own Nelson Mandela, who tangentially was probably named after him. At least that was his English name that was given to him while he was at missionary school. But this is the famous British hero, probably the most famous sailor in history.
Yeah, so the most famous sailor in history. And if we just step back to 1758 in Norfolk, as you mentioned in his titles, he born 7 weeks prematurely, tiny baby.
They didn't think he was going to last.
So they baptized him straight after his birth because they didn't think he was going to survive. And he was always sickly. And he was a small boy and actually ended up being a small man. I think he was 5'4", but the strength of character and the size of his heart was just overpowering to achieve what he did.
you've just gone to the start of his life as this premature, weak baby. And I'm just going to fast forward quickly towards the end of his life. And we were talking about a haggard, scarred 47-year-old. One eye, one arm, couldn't really hear properly either because of all the cannon fire, was, let's say, less than good to his wife, Fanny, although she wasn't particularly honest with him either. These are the stories that remind you that sometimes you get stuck in a body where the spirit is greater than the physical presence. You know, this guy, if he'd been in a stronger body, who knows what he could have achieved.
That's true.
But as you say, born premature and ending up with, one of everything rather than two.
Yeah.
This poor man, he must have been quite a sight towards the end of his life.
Yeah, I mean, I think his lover mentioned the sight when she saw him coming in. And also, he played a little bit of a role in his own demise, probably because he was a very aggressive admiral, but also he loved, his ego. He loved to dress.
Oh, yeah.
So he stood out. So the sniper, it was quite easy to find him.
Well, we've kind of done a bit of a spoiler there on how it all ends. But let's go back to the beginning. This is a guy who also clearly, he showed a lot of intelligence. His father was a priest. His mom died when he was very young. So he grew up with tremendous ambition, but he also showed himself to be quite fearless. And what was normal then is for kids to enroll in the Navy at a very young age. They became kind of almost like servants to officers on the ships, and that's how they learnt to become sailors.
I found that very unusual, age 12.
12.
Which is insane.
I mean, you think about a 12-year-old now, and they're taken away from their parents, put on a vessel. He was always seasick, by the way. Did you hear about that?
Yeah, I also heard about that.
He had seasickness from the moment he first boarded a ship at age 12.
And he struggled through his life.
All the way through to the end of his life. You would think a sailor, because people usually go, oh, I don't get seasick, so I'd probably make a good sailor. Here's the greatest sailor in the world, seasick the whole way through his life. So it's not true.
You made it work.
Yeah. I mean, listen, he also traveled far and wide. I mean, he spent an enormous amount of time in the Caribbean, in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Cayman Islands, Tenerife, the Mediterranean, went off to the Nile and Fort Napoleon. Really an incredibly full life, even in his 47 years.
But it was, his career was shaped. There was a little bit of luck at least because, so I'm not sure what his relationship was like with his dad, but his mom died, like you mentioned, early. And there was nothing left for him. So that's why, he ended up joining the Navy at such a young age. But his mom's brother, so his uncle, was Captain Maurice Suckling. And he took him under his wing. And he spent his teenage years with him, learning. So first of all, technically learning in the Thames, and then also just going out to sea. So he spent his life on the sea, especially his teenage life on the sea, with his uncle. And I think that made a massive difference to the rest of his life and how he lived his life. But his mom dying young played out a lot. He was always looking for attention. It was, he had some tough lives in those days. It wasn't easy.
Absolutely. Interesting that he was in the Navy, learned how to be an able seaman, ended up being, promoted quite quickly through the ranks as he went on and fought battles and took chances.
Or lieutenant at 14.
And disobeyed his superiors very often.
Yeah,
but when proven to have made the right decision, was rewarded rather than scolded. And of course, in those days, what we've got to remember from a context point of view is that the British Navy was coming into its real power. There wasn't at that stage any serious competitor to the Spanish, who'd been in charge of the seas for years, still had the biggest ships and all the rest of it. But the British had grown a very significant navy. They also had possessions all over the world that they had to patrol and trade with. And so shipping became an important part of the British economy and their military outlook. And really, during the course of Nelson's life, I think they reached their apex. And the British Navy was then established as the most powerful navy in the world for maybe 100, perhaps even 200 years after that. So it was a significant time for someone to have joined the Navy. This was the place and the time to make your name in the Navy. And if he'd been born 100 years earlier or 50 years later, he might not have been the hero that he was.
And then also, I think he was one of the reasons why they reached their zenith. It was because of just his amazing skill, and he could preempt. He felt exactly what was going to happen.
Well, they teach a lot of Napoleon's skills in like leadership school and all the rest of it, but they also teach a lot of Nelson's stuff. And really, in some ways, people always try to put Nelson and Napoleon up as, two poles of a battle that was going on at the time. And you asked a question of me just before we started the recording. You said, Wellington or Nelson? And we'll save the answer for the end of the podcast, because I think everybody who, is interested in that period of history has got thoughts about that. And also, they were around at the time of Napoleon.
Yeah.
A good adversary makes for good heroes.
Yeah. But I think when we get to it a little bit later in discussion, just to discuss around Napoleon, because Napoleon was the first to admit that that his navy was shocking, and his naval officers they knew what was good for them, and that not engage with Nelson. So you would find out where these idiots were, and they weren't engaging. You wanted to flip and kill them. So he really struggled because he had superiority on land, but he could not get it in the sea, and that was actually a big part that allowed Wellington finally to hit the nail in the coffin.
So for starters, he went off to the West Indies, where there was a lot of British naval activity. There were also a lot of pirates there at that time, but it was really between them and the Spanish. The nice thing about being in the Navy at that time, if you commanded a vessel and you captured another vessel, you got a large percentage of the loot. So you got to just, whatever's on that ship, if it was gold, you got to keep some of the gold as the commanding officer, and all the sailors on your ship got a smaller percentage. But you made your money this way because they paid you as a naval officer, but the real money was in scoring booty,
He wasn't that interested in the money, it seems.
No, but he was quite interested in this girl who he met called Fanny. Great name. She was from what seemed like a very nice family. Her father was a minor colonial official. He promised Nelson a nice dowry, lots of money, if he married Fanny. Nelson said sure, and it transpired just before they got married that the whole thing was made up. He didn't have any money, the father. Fanny was infertile, so she couldn't have children. And Nelson, being an honorable guy, still went through with the marriage.
Okay, so I didn't pick that up because there was a child, so maybe it was an adopted
not from her.
Okay,
no,
that's incredible.
She couldn't bear children, and she kept it secret from him.
Really?
Yeah.
And so, and just interestingly enough, just on that point, his best man was later to be William IV.
Right. Who was then called, he was also called Sailor Bill by his own family, because he loved, the Navy, and he was on the ships a lot of the time. But yeah, that's interesting.
So she lied to him.
She lied to him. So there's a lot of stuff to discuss there, and from a psychological point of view, what that means.
Yeah, because importantly, later on, it definitely plays a role.
Oh, yeah. They didn't really, there was a lot of romance in the beginning. She was apparently very pretty. She was apparently very lovely. He was always attracted to highly intelligent and beautiful women. Who isn't? So he chose well there, but he had no idea that she was keeping these secrets from him. Anyway, he married her, and they ended up remaining married until his death, even though they fell out of love and things started to go south quite quickly when she moved back to England.
Okay, so when he was in the West Indies, so he did have a lot of run-ins with either the Admiralty or with some of the top brass in the areas that he was operating in. And I think that this is an area, a time of his life where he ended up with quite a lot of depression post this. During the time of the war, the American War of Independence, and it had just ended and the British were now in control. So there were certain things that weren't allowed to be done. So from a trading perspective.
No, Americans couldn't trade with British colonies.
Correct. The trade embargo, 100%. And so he strictly enforced it. And then much to the disgust, because everybody was on the take and corrupt in that area. And so they complained bitterly to the Admiralty about his behavior. And he ended up basically being shipped back home and spent the next 5 years back in his hometown in Norfolk at half pay because of these things. And they did play up in his
apparently, he was also a bit of a disciplinarian. He liked keeping everybody on the ship fit. They had to do exercise every day. He made sure that they, if there's anyone who was insubordinate, they were immediately flogged. And really, despite the fact that later on in his career, he had huge loyalty from his commanders and his ordinary sailors, because he treated them all very well. He dined with them the night before his final battle and that kind of thing. But he also looked after the ordinary sailors, and they looked up to him. But in the beginning of his career, he was very strict about things. He said, there are rules, we don't break the rules. And this goes to what you were saying about the trade embargo.
Yeah, and I suppose that hurt his career.
Yeah,
but
because most of them were corrupt.
Correct, exactly. And then also there was a situation. He also mishandled a delicate situation with Prince, as we just mentioned, who was his best man at his wedding, William Henry, who later became William IV. And he got involved in a dispute with his first lieutenant. This is William now, and he didn't want to. He allowed the young Prince to get away with it a bit, because he just saw him as a very important person, and he didn't want to, fall foul of it at that particular time. So ultimately, in the end, he was unimpressed. The Admiralty were very unimpressed, and he was basically sent home, and he was lingering around on half pay for the next 5 years.
Luckily for him, Napoleon was on the move. Well, this is long before Napoleon was well known. But one of his first jobs as a French artillery officer was to besiege the port of Toulon, which was an important place where the French fleet would be harbored. Napoleon was very good at setting up the siege. He was excellent at arranging the cannon. Little did Nelson know, and little did Napoleon know, that at this stage, while they were both young, they would be facing each other for the first time here. And the British managed to blockade the port successfully. Napoleon managed to besiege Toulon successfully. They both had victories to boast about from that, but they didn't actually meet at that point. They probably never did meet. I think Nelson only ever met Wellington once before he died. So all of these great men, while their paths crossed, they didn't actually
meet on the battlefield.
Yeah. So that was his first proper
and
fight.
This is also where he, around that time, is where he lost sight in his right eye.
So
from dust, he went into a land battle.
He was very gung ho. So he disembarked and actually led a charge on land, and a cannonball hit some sandbags and sprayed sand and stone and obviously there was gunpowder and all the rest of it into his eye, damaged his optic nerve. He could never see out of his right eye ever again. That was the first of his major problems from a physical point of view after a battle.
He used it quite cleverly in a battle later on, one of his other famous battles.
Yeah, he was in Copenhagen where he was taking on the Danish fleet. It was his idea to get them before they even left the port to join the Russians. And he just ignored a signal from his commanding officer to do what the commanding officer
to pull out,
basically. To essentially to retreat, and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I must have used the telescope on my bad eye, so I couldn't see the signal."
Does that term "turn a blind eye" come from that?
It may well. I'm not entirely sure, but he certainly did that, and he had a good sense of humor about it. He also lost his arm later on in another land battle that didn't go so well. It seems he was fine on the sea. As soon as he went onto the land, bad things happened.
But this particular battle he felt terrible about because he lost men, and he lost his arm, and so it's one of the few defeats that he had in his career. But apparently they amputated his arm without any sedation.
No, there was nothing. Listen, we're talking about medicine in inverted commas. They didn't know about bacteria or infections or any of that stuff. So the only thing you could do if someone's arm bone, his humerus, was splintered by cannon and musket fire and all the rest of it, so all they could do is cut it off. So it was cut off sort of between the elbow and the shoulder, and they would saw through it with like a, the kind of saw, like a jigsaw that you would use to cut wood, and you'd have to, they'd take a scarf or something, put it between your teeth, you'd bite down on this thing. If you were lucky, they'd give you some brandy or something to kind of numb it, but you'd need a lot of brandy to
Sure.
not feel that. And then they'd saw through your bone. And that was, there goes Nelson's arm. And then they just threw it overboard.
And then the next day I was back on top. It's just insane. I can't believe it.
So, all right, we're talking about a guy now who's definitely seen some action. We're going to condense a lot of the amazing travels that he did. I mean, he chased Villeneuve, the French admiral, across the Atlantic and back again. He went up into the Baltic to fight the Danes in Copenhagen. Yes. He was often around Spanish ships laden with gold on the western coast of Europe, and also famously fought at the Battle of the Nile, where he led a whole bunch of British ships into what the French thought was a completely defensible position. In fact, the French were so confident that the British wouldn't get through that they put all of their firepower on the port side of the ship. And Nelson, he snuck through and started attacking them on the starboard side, and they had no defense planned.
That was his most complete victory. And it just completely threw Napoleon's Egyptian campaign, just threw it in the bush.
Yeah.
And
disaster.
That was a tough thing in Napoleon's career. When we talk about Napoleon in his career, that Egyptian disaster was tough for him. And Nelson played a massive role in that. And he had to sneak around and escape because Nelson was looking for him.
That's right.
And he had to sneak around, and he did actually get back to France. But that was one of his greatest victories. And I think that what's important to note here is that strategically, and we've spoken about a lot of great military tacticians many, many times on our podcasts. And he was his tactics, they were brilliant, so far advanced of what people were used to. Fighting in lines versus bringing boats on either side. Not being scared to go in shallow water. In Copenhagen, they went into very shallow water, and his enemy got stuck. And his head of command, because he wasn't allowed, because they thought, they were always grumpy with him. The guys back in England, he said all Nelson's ships have run aground, and that's why he raised the flag. But ultimately, it was these guys, and Nelson had maneuvered them into shallow waters in their own port.
Yeah.
So
they should have known better.
Well, they should have known better. So technically, he was incredible.
And it's almost like he could figure out what their game plan was before anything had happened. So he could almost foresee what was going to happen and managed to counteract all their moves, and it drove them crazy. Now, Napoleon was as good on land, but there really weren't many people in all of naval history who could say that they had this ability to plot an enemy's move before they'd even made it.
And if you look at Villeneuve, Villeneuve had the wrath of Napoleon.
Oof.
If he had the communication that we have today, I think every second, every minute, Napoleon would have been screaming at him on the phone because he
abusive boss.
Yeah, but they said no. We know we're going to be killed, so we're actually not even going into battle. That was the French Navy strategy, and it just drove him mad that he could never get a strong navy to support his land battles. And Nelson. The barriers to entry for these guys to get anywhere was extremely high.
Well, he was mostly the lord of the Mediterranean for that period, and the British controlled the seas, and it was very difficult for anyone to move a ship in or out of the Straits of Gibraltar or the Bosphorus or anywhere else at this point without Nelson knowing about it. And while he was there, something interesting happened. He went off to Naples and he met William Hamilton, who was the British ambassador to Naples, and William Hamilton's wife, who was a certain Lady Alexandra, what was her name? Emma Hamilton, that's right. Lady Emma Hamilton, apparently also beautiful and intelligent, ticked those two boxes, so, Nelson's interest was piqued. And he immediately started an affair with her. And it was a very public affair. Everyone in the world seems to have known it was going on. William was apparently okay with it. They kind of formed this thruple and lived together for quite a long time.
It was exactly like that. It seemed, he knew about it. And I think he'd almost accepted it because I think he really loved Emma Hamilton, and he said, "Look, I'm not going to be able to keep her, but I will be able to keep her in this type of environment." Nelson's married, so I think it just worked. at the time. But the press, I don't know what you would call it in those days. I mean, it was properly frowned upon.
Well, I mean, during his life, because he was such a hero, I think he and Emma got away with it. But as soon as he died, they turned on her horribly. And they called her an adulterer. And, they had a daughter called Horatia, who was clearly Nelson's daughter. She ended up having 10 kids. She died in the late 1800s. But, she was essentially treated quite badly too, even though all Nelson wanted, he said, despite not changing his will, he said, please just look after Emma and my daughter. It's all he wanted in his final wishes while he was dying on that ship at the end. But we'll get to that in a second. So essentially, Nelson rises up the ranks. He was a bit pissed off that they made him a baron. He thought he deserved higher than that on the rank. Yeah, he wanted to be a viscount. He thought that was probably better, but he probably thought even more. He probably expected to be, made a duke like Wellington would be. Didn't happen. He also thought that, being Sir at an relatively early stage of his career was also a bit cheeky. He expected more from that too. And he liked hanging around with very powerful, very connected people. He also loved when people clapped and cheered for him. And for a while, he did a tour of England where he was very well received. So people really celebrated him as a hero. And they needed good news at that point. Napoleon was victorious everywhere in Europe. It looked like, it was going to be a whitewash for him. And essentially, Nelson was this one star in an otherwise quite dark sky for them.
And, he built this PR machine around himself that played a big role in being as famous as he was. He really knew how to play this.
Yeah, and there weren't a lot of celebrities around at that time.
No.
He milked it for all it was worth.
100%, yes.
So let's fast forward to the last chapter of his life, because we could talk about each of his battles and his genius in all of them. I think we've covered a few of those. But the final battle was at Trafalgar. What makes this such an interesting battle is it really was decisive. It was all about control of the seas. And it couldn't have been a greater apex moment for any sailor than it was for Nelson. So he was on his ship, the Victory. He had told all of his sailors they weren't allowed to climb up into the rigging and fire muskets like the French were, because he was worried that they would set fire to the sails. So it was kind of easy to see what was going on his ship. The French at this point were desperate. They had been broadsided. Most of their ships were on fire.
Yeah, from both sides. Yeah.
The English had waged a far superior battle on the French, and they had no way of fighting it. They also had better ships, faster ships. The French were kind of big and heavy. They didn't move quickly enough. They were commanded by inexperienced sailors, and they knew they were an inferior navy to the French. But there were all these guys in the rigging, and they could kind of spot Nelson standing on the quarterdeck in his famous blue coat.
With that big diamond on his hat.
Right.
That he was given by that.
Correct. So, I mean, he was kind of like a sitting duck. And one of the sailors on the Redoutable just took a pot shot, hit him, and it got him right in the spinal cord. He was immediately disabled, fell down, and took a long while to die, but got to see victory.
Yeah.
And he got famously to utter his last words, which were, "Thank God I've done my duty," and knew that the English had properly beaten the French at this seminal battle. So in some way, it is a poetic ending for him. He was buried in St. Paul's Cathedral in a tomb which you can still go and visit. It's one of the grandest tombs in England. It was originally intended for Henry VIII.
That's true.
And it's now
Cardinal
Wolsey.
But then Henry wanted it. Henry took it. And then they buried Nelson in it.
And really there hasn't been, or there wasn't, an English funeral, a public funeral as big as Nelson's, probably until Princess Diana.
Yeah, and the amount of people that just left St. Paul's Cathedral walking around, and the people hadn't even left. It was just insane. It was a different era.
Sure.
And there wasn't TVs or anything like that in those days, but there was just massive, massive sadness. The nation just mourned. They were mourning a hero and his team, that that were with him. They were just mourning him as a man. He was an incredible leader. And it was such a loss.
His statue is probably in the most central place in all of London. Trafalgar Square, which is named after that battle, and Nelson's column in the middle of it. It's a meeting place. It's a central public square of London. It's also, famous for all the most important protests. And our South Africa House, our embassy, is right on Trafalgar Square. Canada House is there too, the British Museum. It's an incredible place, and he's been honored throughout history. Winston Churchill said he was an inspiration of his during the Second World War. There are so many things named after him all over the world.
Yeah. And also some of the rituals in the Navy. So the blood of Nelson, so they drink brandy because they embalmed his body when at the end of the battle, they embalmed him in brandy to keep him fresh. But the challenge was that the brandy swelled his face so much that they covered it at the funeral. So it backfired a little bit. But now they're still doing it to this day, where they drink the blood of Nelson.
Well, I mean, a lot of these things, whenever I think of the British Navy, I think of that, which is like the famous sailor song. And I'm sure that this guy epitomizes all of that more than anyone else.
Yeah.
I mentioned at the beginning of this that you'd asked me a question before we started recording. Who was the greater military hero?
Yes.
Wellington or Nelson? What do you think?
Well, I've looked a lot into both of them, and it's just so difficult because they the one fought on land, the other one fought in the sea. They both had great strategies. The thing is I'd go with Nelson, and
okay, so then Nelson and Napoleon.
Oh, yeah. Napoleon's a hero of mine. It's
a tough one.
It is a tough one, but I mean, Napoleon didn't have anything on Nelson when it came to, it looked like he was coming out in his Lalo, it's just. So these are it's such a good question. I don't know how to answer them because
I think it all depends on where. Like if I were at sea in the 1800s, I would want Nelson in charge.
Agreed.
If I were on land, I'd want Napoleon in charge. Or Wellington, who ultimately beat Napoleon.
Yeah.
But while Napoleon was in his heyday, he was unstoppable, and Nelson was the same.
I think that Napoleon, he was definitely a military man, but he was also looking big picture strategy, whereas Wellington was a military man.
Yeah.
And Nelson, for that matter, just knew what and what was great about Nelson was that he would. Well, let me just be careful when I say great, but he would annihilate. Often his predecessors would say, yes, we'll just rattle them up a bit. And he would say, no, we need to annihilate them. So he wouldn't be happy with anything less.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Blind History. Every episode is available on the Cliff Central app, cliffcentral.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.